My name is Denis Leclerc, or Denis Leclerc. I'm a professor at Thunderbird School of Global Management. And I think out of all the sessions you have in the book here today, I think I'm the one who had the longest title. But Julian told me to write a title that was not common, so I decided let me just do all the description of what I want to talk to you about. So as I told you, I'm a professor at Thunderbird, and my specialization is cross-cultural communication and negotiation. And what I want to talk to you about is the fact that I do a lot of executive education, so I go around the world a lot. I go and talk to different companies, and companies come to us to help their executives on their learning journey. And one time, my colleague and I were doing a program, and we could see that we were connecting with the audience, but not 100%. So we stopped, and we gave them a piece of paper, and this is the question we asked them. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to leading or contributing to a global project? So think about maybe what your answer would be. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to leading or contributing to a global project? So any of you have any idea of what you would think some of the, yes?
So for me, is being able to bridge the gap between, let's say, an American corporate organization and all the culture, business practices, bureaucracies, you name it, that happens in different countries. And how do you, in both sides, you have to almost translate from here to there and from there to here.
Absolutely, being able to bridge that gap.
Exactly.
That's a very good perspective. Anybody else has a maybe an idea of what some of the challenges would have been for these people? Yeah. Alignment. So it's not only bridging the gap, it's also after you have bridged the gap, it's like how do you align to see all the priorities? It's a very good point. Anybody else? No? No? So actually here's what we found out, which totally surprised. So to me, every time I go and talk to an HR department, the conversation always has turned in the last few years about issues of innovation, issues of strategy, leadership, and they always talk about resources. They always say, you know what, we are tight on resources, we need to know how to use our resources better. And actually, resources was not even in the top 20 of the issues that executives had. And when we started to compute the data, and we have data for from over 2,500 executives in 20 different industries, so we asked the same question in multiple venues. We have also split that now between gender and also years in an organization, because there's a different maturity in an organization, there's different needs and wants for somebody who's starting in an organization compared to somebody who has had maybe 10 to 15 years of experience. And here's what we found out. We found out that 50% of these executive challenges comes into leading teams. Half of their biggest challenge is leading teams. So leading teams meant, and I will give you more details on that, but it's all about leading teams. So it's like bridging the gap between people in an organization. What surprised us actually, when we started to look at it, okay, so we have 50% of that on leading team. What else? Well, 40% is all about the organization. It's like, how do I challenge, how do I give feedback to the organization? How do I basically influence my boss? How do I influence without too much authority? And to us, the one thing that started to come up when we started to look at the data is that roughly 10% of also the challenge from this executive came from what is known in leadership as self-leadership, the concept of self-leadership. How do I basically maintain my drive, basically? I don't know if you know this company called Tignum. Do you know this concept of self-leadership? Tignum is an amazing company. They work with Formula One teams. They work with executives. And what they do is they optimize executive capacity by looking at everything, their diet, their sleep pattern, when they engage in meetings, when do they have the meetings. It's actually a full kind of representation. And they are absolutely amazing because I think they are pushing the envelope of that self-leadership. In academia, people still look at self-leadership in a very kind of constructed system. And Tignum has taken this concept and said, yeah, but actually for us as executives, we also need to make sure that we eat properly, that we sleep properly, and we don't get bothered by information. So they have created this whole training concept that is actually very powerful. So that's the 10%. But let's come back to my first big bucket, if you want to change it. 50% of the executives is about managing team. I mean, to me, that was very surprising. In a weird way, I was happy because what I teach is actually cross-cultural communication and negotiation. So I was like, oh, we're on target. What was interesting is that that's not the program that the company wanted us to deliver. My experience is when you talk about communication to HR departments, to organization, people look at communication and like, I don't really need communication, I need leadership. And so the way I've been able to get around that is like go to organizations and say, I'm teaching leadership. My prism is actually communication. And when you start the conversation that way, then I think we have a better communication or conversation with HR departments or with organizations. So that 40% bucket, it came under multiple areas. One, and for some of you would totally recognize that for people who have worked in global teams, is a couple of things. One is like, how do I motivate people I don't see on a daily basis? How do I motivate people across border? So especially coming from an American organization that is driven by quarter deadlines, and you go to some companies and people on your team will say, oh yeah, tomorrow, I'll do that tomorrow. But if you hear that for that American mindset, to you tomorrow is 24 hours, when if you hear that from your team from Indian engineers, tomorrow just means I heard you, it's going to be taken care of. It doesn't mean 24 hours though. It just means, yeah, no, it's on my schedule, it's going to be taken care of. So right there, you have that motivation is very different. Your emergency doesn't mean it's their emergency. And so motivation is already like not to line. Another thing also that comes into that, so it's not only motivation, but it's also the issue of like, how do I give feedback to people? And for some of you who have had a lot of experiences, again, in global teams, it's like, how do I provide feedback? And when you look at some organizations, they try to impose the French feedback system, the German feedback system, the Japanese feedback, whatever the nationality of the organization is, and you realize that that feedback is very hard. I work with some organization that the best feedback I ever got were working with a German organization. But I'm a direct communicator. I'm a super direct communicator. If I don't like something, I will tell you right away, and I want you to do the same thing. So working with a German company was just like, oh, I like these people. I mean, if I mess it up. But here's the interesting thing. The feedback was all negative. My first reading was like, it was all negative. Then I reread it, I called the person, and I said, you know what? I love the feedback that your organization is giving me, but it's all negative. And this is what I learned, actually. What do you think was the concept of giving me negative feedback? What was the whole concept behind it? Absolutely, continuous improvement. Why should a manager spend and waste their time on telling you what you are doing well? The whole job of a leader or manager is to help you to go in continuous improvement. And I worked with them for 3 years after that because it was perfect. Every time I got some amazing feedback. Now at the first read, not good. But then when I understood that from their perspective, it was amazing feedback. And the feedback I got was very detailed. Like, your second session, your slides were too long, or it's not explicit enough. I'm like, that's pretty amazing. And she said, no, it's very good. They paid attention to what you are talking about. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, just flips the conversation. But think about having to give feedback in multicultural teams. How are you going to give feedback for somebody from Germany, from France, from Italy, and from Japan? And this is your team. And that part, I think, is still a lot of work for a lot of people who do cross-cultural communication and leadership, because that's a big question that I don't think organizations have answered yet. They take one framework and then they try to fit everybody into these scales, these questions, and then, how do you miss talent? And that's really at the core that to me is the most dangerous. Like, do you have a potential of missing talent, which is what organizations are looking for. The other thing is, so I have to I think I can do my thing without my glasses, and I realize, no, you can't read a piece of paper. The other thing is also conflict management. I mean, I'm not talking about conflict management as a big C, but a small c, which is like, what happens when you have a disagreement? And organization, I mean, my experience, again, is organizations really do not like to talk about that conflict management system, and at the same time, it's absolutely critical. It's what drives having a project finishing on time, under budget, or having a project basically dragging its feet because there was a conflict between multiple teams and nobody knew how to solve it. Everybody came to conflict management with their own cultural lens, and then it turned into this big nightmare. The example that became very interesting for us is we were working with this pharmaceutical company, and for some of you that work in pharmaceutical company, they are very decentralized in terms of how they do things. They have manufacturing in one place, marketing done in another place, and they have the worst time with their manufacturing, in the production, the volume. So it created a big chaos in the organization, but every time, and here's the interesting part, the only time they flew somebody from the headquarters was to fix problem. So think about it from the mindset of the people receiving these people. So I don't see you as a manager. You are my manager. You work from Switzerland. I never see you. Then I have a conflict, and you come to me now just to solve the conflict. Right there, this is not good. Right there, the perception is like, I never see you. You're only coming here to basically blaming me. And you are here for 3 days. So you come here on Monday, and your flight is on Friday, on a Thursday, whatever, and you are here for 3 or 4 days. So the entire interaction is all about conflict. You can solve it, but also sometimes what happens actually, you cannot solve it. So then I fly back, and I'm just still like, I think I've solved a couple of things. I have not built that relationship. And so I go back, I might solve that issue, but 6 months later we have the same problem. So conflict management also became very important. And here's also part of the 50% of the challenge from this executive and talent, is the concept of inclusion and diversity. And this is why I want us to think about something very important, because in the US, organizations are very driven by diversity, but actually what matters for global organizations is the inclusion. And diversity is a legal term here in the US. It's a legal construct in the US. It's the only country. It's not a legal construct in Europe. It's not a legal construct in Asia. This is why in the US, when people apply for a job, there is a very important sentence for every job applicant, which is what?
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity employer. That's what it means. It means that we each have an equal opportunity to get that job. Now, I don't want to go into a tangent, but that's what it says. So that concept of diversity is a legal construct in the US. Inclusion, though, is a leadership challenge. And so what you have is organizations so you have organizations at different spectrum of the diversity and inclusion spectrum. So organizations are just starting to focus on the diversity. And they have what they call a DNI. So they have a diversity and inclusion officer. So they spend a lot of time on diversity because they are really US-centric. And as they move into globalization, so they get somebody who's an IND, which is an inclusion and diversity officer. The progression, it shows you that the organization have flipped about what they believe is important for them. Because that's one point they realize that when they become global, what matters is not the diversity, is the inclusion. And what we got as kind of interesting description on that concept of diversity and inclusion is some examples. I will give you a couple of examples. People writing down, my company has employees networks that are very popular in the US, and my company wants me to also implement these globally. And so you have managers or leaders in foreign countries who say, well, I work for an American company, and in the US they have maybe a group of employees network for veterans, for Asian employees, for Indian employees, whatever the term is, and they want me to do the same thing locally. And what they have is a big struggle, because it's like, I can't do that. I mean, nobody in my country would be able to understand what the diversity is, and nor is the inclusion. So part of that challenge is that 50% is the inclusion and diversity. And the last thing, since I have my glasses here, is actually the cross-cultural differences. You see what we were talking about, that bridging the gap. And that, to me, is where there's a lot of work that has to be done. Because that cross-cultural communication challenge is not only critical, but actually what's critical is all the misunderstanding. Because we can read a book and we could get the do's and don'ts very quickly, but reading a book doesn't mean I'm able to apply the book. And so what you have is you can have people reading that. What they need is change, a cognitive change, being able to change their mindset, because that part is actually where the change is going to happen. So I have organizations, they go and put people through training a lot, in communication training, and then they complain because they don't feel their employees have changed, that the people are still the same mindset. It's like, yeah, because they have not yet broken their behavior. They are still in the same mindset. What you have to change is the mindset. And I have to tell you, I don't know if I find it interesting, sometimes organizations are global. Something happens wrong, and people say, well, it's the way we do it in France. And to me, it's just like, well, wait a minute here. If you're a global organization, I mean, why suddenly are you playing what I call the cultural card that should be like this ace in your pocket? It's like, being from France adds a lot of things to organization. I think every organization should have a lot of French people in them, and just obviously, smart, nice people. But that card, I cannot play the card every time I'm not performing and say, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not performing, but that's the French, that's the way we do things. And that's the part to me in organization I've seen, which is like that cross-cultural communication. Sometimes people say, yeah, but we don't do things that way here locally. It's fine, but if you're engaging people to a global level, everybody has to change their mindset. Everybody has to start to look at having a much better, higher global mindset. And so that's the 50%. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. And so on that cross-cultural difference is also all this issue of communication issue that we just talked about. The next one, the second big bucket, which was that organization. And my colleague and I were absolutely surprised by that. Because we're like, okay, communication, leadership in teams should make total sense. But 40% of these leaders' challenges has to do with the organization itself. It's all the soft influencing strategy. And of all the answers, what we got as to us the most interesting and challenging was people saying, I don't know how to influence my boss. I need skills to be able to influence upward. So for some of you who have worked in organization, you realize that sometimes, especially in global projects, that person, that boss, that leader is not physically present. So you have to be able to transfer and translate that to another culture to be able to influence a boss who is on the other side of the planet. And so that influencing upward becomes very important. Also, the big interesting part is, global organizations, one thing they share is that everybody works in a matrix organization now. So I work with one oil and gas company, and I know people who were from the original company and the people who came after the merger, because the people who were from the original company, they still describe themselves as being from that one company. 15 years after the merger, they say, yeah, but I'm from Heritage. 15 years. And what you see is like when they have to influence people inside their own organization, they would try to find out, are you from the Heritage company or are you from the new kind of merger company? And it's very hard to break that down. And what you have is this, in that matrix, what you have is like, so rather than working in silos, now you have a matrix. So you have, at every point of intersection is a potential point of conflict. I mean, some of you have been in meetings where you're like, why am I here? Why do I really have to be here? I mean, it's just like, so suddenly from having a team that is super small, agile, can go and move the project, so there is 10 people, and you have people in marketing who are there. It's like, why? It's an engineering problem. Why do we have the law? There is no contract signed. So you have 10 people, and here it is, for a leader, you have to manage the stakeholders now. And that's why you go to some companies, they really miss the days of basically being in silo, because they think, you know what, so we could move so fast. But that matrix is critical, because that's the world in which we live. I work with Medtronic, when they just went through the change of being a region orientation to a product oriented. The new CEO they have, just escaped me, his name just escaped. Omar, he's a new CEO, he came back from GE. Yeah. He came 5 years ago. He came on board to run Medtronic. And one of the first thing he did in the first 6 months, he shifted the orientation of the entire organization. They used to be by region. So the people who did the pacemaker, they were by region. So they had basically the US and Latin America region. There was the European, Asia. He came in and said, no. The one common thread you have is what? Pacemakers. So your team is not the person you're sitting across with. The team now is global. And it created pure chaos because the people did not know how to manage the stakeholders. They did not know how to basically influence everybody. And so that was a very important part. The third part is actually the upper management, managing to your boss and be able to influence your boss. And the one thing we saw in our research in terms of talent management and what we have done is the scope of the project. So I don't know if you ever talk to people when you work with them in an organization, but if you ask them how many projects do you work on, and what you will see, it's sometimes an absolutely astonishing number of projects people are working on. And I read an article in Economist a few years ago that talked about the fact that people who went through the recession in 2008, when the workforce shrunk, these people were added on their plates the project that because the labor force had shrunk. Well, these people from 2008 to now, like for 5-6 years, they managed this project. They managed an extra 6, 7, 8, 10 projects. They were very good at it. So now these people have become the norm. So suddenly when people are hired, it's like, you know what? You don't have what it takes because guess what? We have had people who are able to manage not 10, 15 projects. And for you starting that breadth of project, well, guess what? It's not sustainable. And so 40% of the people are saying, you know what? I have too many projects right now. I'm not able to really manage all of that. The project also is because of that matrix. It's not only the number of projects, is the type of projects that have increased because suddenly everybody is involved, and so they have more projects and more projects have more indirect kind of differentiation. The only time that one concept came about, which was the last one, which was resources. Resources only became important really down, which is people are saying, I don't have any resources. And when we ask them about resources, when we go down in the data, what do you think resource mean? People. It's not the money. They don't want an increased budget. They want more people. It's not the issue of time. It's the issue of like, I don't have enough people on my team. And organizations now look at it and say, but people were able to manage this project in the past, so how come you can't make it? Which to me, that's my only little theory here because I work in an organization. And also is the reason why there's such a high level of burnout or low efficiency in organizations because all of us here in the room here, we have some weeks we can take so much work. It's just absolutely, we're just like, oh, give me more project and work. And you have other weeks where you're like, I just can't take it anymore. You know, I want to just stay home. I just want to do nothing for like a day or 6 hours. And basically you can't now because, oh, well, we have these things here. Mm-hmm. And basically people, and if you work in global organization, people expect services like right away. They expect you to answer right away. And so these resources were not resources in terms of money or time. They were resources in terms of people. And that's the part to me that was very surprising. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is just the last one, which was this whole area of self-leadership. And in self-leadership is one thing which was the number one issue of self-leadership that we found out is time management. No, so I know some people, some friends of mine, they do a lot of work on time management, and I don't know if you try all these different ways of like creating your list on time management. I'm really good at that for 3 weeks. Really good.
Oh, that's great, 3 weeks.
Really good for 3 weeks. The 4th week though, I'm like, yeah, but what I like is also the fact that people can interrupt me, that I have a day where I'm totally loose on, anything that happens. So I go through waves of like going back and do my, these are the 5 things I want to do tomorrow, and this is my ranking, and I like to do that for a while, and then I get extremely bored with that. So I go back, so I'm still working on it after all these years, but time management is very, very important. But here's a descriptor from these executives, which I find absolutely interesting. When we ask them about one of their challenges, their behavior that they wanted to acquire is patience. So as much as they say they don't have enough time, now the executive said, I wish I had more patience, and here's what it means to them. What do you think it means actually, that they want to have more patience? Which has a big impact on how you lead your team actually. What do you think patience means?
Listening.
So listening?
Or tolerance for mistakes.
Tolerance for mistake? What else?
Control.
Huh?
Control.
Control. So actually patience for them, it also meant, if I give you something to do, how long is it going to take you to do it? And like, it's going to take you 2 days. You know what? I'm going to do it tonight. Give me that spreadsheet. I'm going to do this calculation. And not having the patience to basically allow the people you work with to make a mistake, allowing people to learn. Because, and when I talk to executive about it, I say, how do you think you're training your people in that case? Because when you are doing it, you don't see it happening. You say, oh no, I'm super efficient, my team is efficient. I say, but what do you think happens from the employee's perspective if every time you take the stuff and say, I'm going to do it? What do you think happens? You train them to have them wait for you to do their job. Mm-hmm. And so you are adding to your plate, but the patience was very, very important, which came to the issue of delegating tasks. And that is absolutely critical in global teams. The number of executives I've talked to who say, you know what, yes, I have a team dispersed, but sometimes I find it easier if we can do the work, and then we can check on what other people are doing. It's like, yeah, but what you're doing is doing extra work for yourself. So that delegating the task is actually critical. And again, you need to have the patience to have and allow people to fail. Because otherwise they are never going to learn. I mean, they are never going to be able to be in your talent pipeline to be able to really work. And the two last thing that to us was very interesting when it comes down to this global project is, what is the big picture? Why am I doing what I'm doing right now? I don't know if you heard, but companies always have a vision statement. But a vision statement is like, is that really what's going to make me get up in the morning? I mean, it could, but that vision I have to be able to internalize it and see that I'm part of that vision here. And the research shows that when you have like executives, like a CEO creating a vision for an organization, and there was a research conducted a few years ago that shows that for every layers in an organization, the vision loses 10% of clarity. Now think about what it means if you have 4 layers, that whatever the CEO is trying to achieve as a vision of the organization, if you have 4 layers, you have lost 40% of clarity of what that vision is, which puts more strain on the CEO to be able to communicate that vision over and over. But a lot of people, when you ask them, you really have a conversation with them about their projects, they're like, I don't know how this project fits in that big picture. And here's the last thing that to me I found very interesting or disheartening is a lot of people say, I am not sure I believe in the project. And here's the problem with that. It's like, I have to communicate that to my team and sell them a vision or project that at the core, I don't believe in. I mean, I'm not really on board. And so it could be a great project, but if personally I'm like, you know what, I am not sure I believe in it, it's going to be very hard for me to have the vision, to have the communication skill, to tell you how amazing that project is. And what gets harder is the fact that, again, we're not talking about one project here. We're talking about multiple projects. So for these multiple projects, you have to be able to create a vision statement or be engaged 100%. No. So that's what we found in the research. So a couple of things that became, do you have any questions on what we just talked about? Applications or questions in general? No? Yeah?
For the 50%, for that part, and yesterday we were talking about we might have the big picture, the challenge, but when it comes to specifics. And the example you provided was direct versus indirect communication.
Right.
So I was wondering, like, what are tools that we could use, maybe books or just other methods, so that we can improve these skills, so that on the ground level we are more effective in these situations.
That's a very good question. So, a couple of things. So, again, I have my PhD in communication. So, to me, every time my filter is communication. I mean, I do care where you're from, but what I care about is listening to how you communicate, how you give feedback to people. My experience has been, though, if I go to and at Thunderbird, if we go to an organization and say, we could teach you how to communicate, again, this is not the word you want to use. You want to use leadership, because leadership is the outcome. So being able to understand the direct and indirect and be able to flip direct and indirect, the outcome of that capacity is actually you are a better leader. But between that and that, you have the cognitive aspect, which is like, as a leader, you have to be reminded all the time. A great exercise I do with people to show them, I ask them to go to an email they wrote. Because email, I don't know if you have noticed, but email is a total nightmare. The number of time we waste about doing clarification of a statement, I would rather pick up the phone. Yep. Call me, because that email, this is not what I meant. And it's like, well, but that's the way I read it. So I do that exercise with the executive. I say, okay, if you're not sure what I mean by direct and indirect, go back to an email you sent and go back to the chain of questions people are asking you. Just that. They look at it and it's like, oh. And I say, how many times do you have to do a clarification of the email you sent? And it's like, well, that's why I hate to do it. It's like, okay, here's why. It's because your email, it's not that you're not a good leader, but the people are totally confused in that instance. So you send an email that you think is good, but you confuse your team. And here's the great example I have. So I asked a group of executives to do that. And in a group, I had an executive who looked at me and said, like, can I share that email I just sent to my team? It's like, you want to plug in? Say, yeah, I need to plug in because this is exactly what's happening. So he plugged his laptop and showed everybody basically what the email he sent. He said, I realize I'm a super direct communicator. He's an engineer by training. He said, I'm very direct. Again, if I don't like something, my emails are usually very short. This is what has to be done. This is when it has to be done. Go and do it. He said, here's the mistake I made. And when I told him, he said, oh man, I know I see it. So before he came to Thunderbird and to do a 3-day program, he decided to send an email to his team. And the email he sent them was like, hey, you guys, you have done a great job, last 6 months on that project. I'm really happy to be part of the team and leading you. I'm going to be done on this training at Thunderbird, and I'm going to have a low amount of access to email. But I really do appreciate everything you have done for me and for the team in the last 6 months. As soon as he sent it, people started to send me email back, like, what's going on? Are you leaving us? Are you going to Thunderbird? And he said, I can't. He said, I've spent like every night, basically, I'm spending emails to people. I said, no. I would just, because his style of leaders was not to be this nice, encouraging type of leadership. His style was saying, I give you feedback just because what you have to improve, not about, I'm not going to tell you like what you all want me to do. And his email was totally against his own style. And he said, I totally get it. I said, you should rewrite that email and just tell them what you wanted to tell them. Say, all I wanted to tell them is like, I'm going to be out of email for the next 3 days. It's like, so write it back. I say, you guys, this is what I was trying to say. But it was a great example of direct and indirect, and actually the consequences on leadership, because people thought that somebody was hiding something. And it was not, it was just like, I'm going to be gone. But it was that issue of basically the direct and indirect, basically.
It's also a matter of like setting an expectation and breaking it.
It's correct. So if your style is to be direct, it's going to be, so people who know your style, if they know you are direct, they are going to respect it. They might not like it, but they are going to respect it, because they say, you know what, that person, I know what he stands for. But if you change that without, so that's why I see people who go to training or get a coach, and very quickly people can find out they have a coach. Because their style is so drastically different, they're like, you have a coach now, huh? And they're going to be able to pick that up, but what they want to know is like, are you going to really change? Or is it because only the coach is behind you and he's forcing you to change your behavior for a couple of weeks? No, you have people who can do it, so they learn from that. It's like, oh, I need to be more aware of that. And you have people who get a coach, and it's super useful to them because it's bringing them to their awareness, and the coach is really changing their behavior. Otherwise, it's like, you can have a coach, if there is no change, it's not going to matter for the organization. So, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Beyond the communication, styles and all that you talked about, one of the challenges I've seen in my career is when you're doing business globally, you also have to understand the industry, the rules, regulations, the ways the business is done in both sides.
Correct.
To appreciate the differences. So to give you an example, the United States and Brazil, there's so much bureaucracy in the economy there that the corporate office in the U.S. doesn't understand why can't you just
can't
move
you
this
do that?
from here
Yeah,
to there,
absolutely.
how long it takes, and vice versa. Why the Americans want us to go so fast we can't do it. So you almost have to cross-pollinate that expertise or that information so people can understand where each one is coming from.
Absolutely, and actually, when I was telling you about the patients, sometimes the patients like, why is it that you cannot do things the way we're doing it? Yesterday I was listening to a great presentation about doing business in India, and if you start about why don't they do things that way, you have lost. Because your idea is you cannot change the way people do business in their home country. They're very successful. As a leader, what you have to be able to do is, okay, I need to be ready because I know everything I've learned about how to do business in this country is going to be different. And so it's the ability of a leader to be able to say, in the US, we can do paperwork or we can push, getting signature in 3 weeks. Let's see what happens. But that's very hard. And that's like how the culture and the expectations are built in an organization. That comes from the top of the organization.
Yep.
It's very hard for people who are at the bottom trying to engage people and realize, I have no power. But my company is forcing me to get that thing done like in 2 weeks. And people are like, good for you. It won't happen in 2 weeks. Either you don't have the right connection, you don't understand the culture, things have to be translated, or whatever it is. So that's a great example. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Yeah?
So when you look at behavior, do you tie it to performance metrics?
I'm sorry?
When you look at behavior, organizational behavior, do you tie it or look at any analysis of how it's tied to performance metrics?
So behavior is actually the hardest thing to change. I mean, it takes the longest. Like, for example, all the books you have in cross-cultural communication is all about the do's and don'ts. I mean, they can go to the Los Angeles airport and take about how to do business in France or how to do business in Germany. So they tell you how to behave in meetings. That, to me, is actually the easiest thing to take care of. What's very hard is actually everything that is the cognitive process. It's not only you don't want to offend people, but actually what's more important is like how do you engage people? Like, so the matrix for like behavior, I mean, you could do matrix on like, for example, like what's your perception of time? I mean, you can see, people show up on time or not. But it's really like more for how do you change your cognitive process? How do you engage people from a different level? Because I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, because it's just a heuristic thing from my perspective. It just seems like it's highly predictive to look at a performance metric and then predict how that person's going to behave. So I'm just kind of curious if you've done any research or looked at that in terms of behavior, organizational behavior.
So organizations, all they care about is the outcome. And that's very hard because what they will do is they will push people to be able to succeed. And there's something I remind people in organizations, like people's time is the most flexible thing, which people forget. Like an organization doesn't care, for example, if it took you 10 hours, 20 hours, or 100 hours to get this project done. Was it done by November 7th? That's all they care about. So if you are looking at that behavior and you say, well, that's your deadline, in that case, that could be, an aspect. But I do not know in precisely what the answer to your question actually. I have to say, no, I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to ask.
No,
so many
that's
questions.
fine. No.
Do you have any, do you know of any companies, or can you share some of the companies in your experience that have been able to be very successful at managing a global business?
In my experience, so the company, in my specialization at Thunderbird, in terms of a lot of the companies I work with, is oil and gas company and pharmaceutical businesses. So I've spent in the last 15 years, I've spent pretty much most of my time either working in these two groups. In the pharmaceutical area, some companies are much better at engaging with the difference in culture than others. I have found, for example, that Swiss companies are much more patient in general with the success of a project than an American company taking over, merging and acquiring another company. I think American companies are very driven by every quarter, and that's where there's a level of efficiency. It's also super detrimental to merger and acquisition, especially globally. Nothing happens in a quarter time. I just came back from Dubai, and I was talking to a couple of American companies in Dubai and how hard it was for them to enter the Middle East. And I say, well, it's interesting because in the Middle East, one of the major concepts you have to understand is WASDA, which is connection. Who do you know? If you don't understand it, and that will take you some time. So they were comparing their results compared to another company and said, don't do that. Because these people, they have the connections. And so, I have not worked with all industries. I'm sure you have had experiences over like a different spread of industry. I know that in pharmaceutical companies, I know that when I work with a Swiss company, that like they acquire a lot of small businesses, but they usually don't touch the culture. They usually, because especially in pharma, it's all about the talent you are acquiring. So it's all about, I want to acquire your small business, not for, the product is interesting, but the product is made by people, and the people are the talent. So they leave the talent alone for like sometimes 2 years, 3 years, which is sometimes seen unheard of. Where American companies, I've seen them just coming around and say, we're going to integrate you into our HR system, and we're going to shrink your supply side, we're going to do all these things, and then within 3 years, we're going like, oh, that didn't pay off. Like, no, it didn't pay off because all your talent was gone within 9 months. When all the time, all these scientists who create your pharma, your compounds are gone. They are working for your competitors now. So, I don't know if I've answered fully to your question, but that has been my experience.